This is the brief on Philippine witness protection and immunity laws. We're exploring two foundational laws, PD 749 and RA 6981, that aim to dismantle corruption by offering absolute legal immunity and physical protection to the insiders helping the state secure convictions. First, let's talk immunity for bribe givers. To catch corrupt officials, the state actually grants immunity to the person paying the bribe, provided their voluntary testimony is crucial. Think of it as letting the small fish go to catch the shark. But what if they're just lying to harass a rival? Well, their immunity gets instantly stripped, bringing serious criminal charges. Now, earning immunity is one thing, but how do you stay safe after angering a shark? Second, that brings us to the Witness Protection Program. Run by the Department of Justice, this protects people witnessing grave felonies who face severe threats. Even criminal accomplices can become state witnesses, assuming they aren't the most guilty. Interestingly, cops can't join, though their families can. So, how do we ensure an accomplice actually follows through on the stand? They sign a super strict agreement. Lying means perjury charges and getting booted out. But keeping witnesses safe requires more than just hiding them in a safe house. It demands total livelihood support. Finally, let's look at the comprehensive benefits of protection. We're talking secure housing, free medical care, and legally protected paid work absences. If a witness is tragically killed, their family receives a 10,000 peso burial benefit, and dependent kids get a free ride straight through college. It's essentially an economic safety net. Because forcing a witness into crippling poverty is really just another way for criminals to silence them. Ultimately, these laws recognize that the justice system can only bring the darkest crimes to light if it provides an ironclad shield for the people holding the flashlight.
So, here's a question for you. How do you get someone to testify against a powerful criminal when they themselves are tied up in the crime? It's a huge challenge for any justice system, right? It's a paradox that can end up protecting the powerful and just lets corruption grow. Okay, let's put you in the hot seat for a second. Imagine you hold the key. You have the information that could put a seriously corrupt official away for a long time. But to do that, you have to admit that you're the one who paid the bribe. So what do? Do you speak up and risk going to jail yourself?
Or do you just keep your mouth shut? You save your own skin, sure, but the bigger problem, the corruption, just keeps on going completely unchecked. And look, this isn't just some thought experiment. For decades, this was the exact dilemma that basically paralyzed the justice system here in the Philippines.
Which brings us right to our first big idea, the witness's dilemma. It really was a classic catch-22 situation. See, to catch the big fish, you needed testimony from the little fish. But the little fish, they were absolutely terrified of getting caught in the same net. For ages, this made it almost impossible to convict dishonest officials. And the reason is simple, right? The very people who had the proof, the ones who paid the bribes, were scared of being prosecuted themselves. And that fear, well, it created this perfect wall of silence that kept the corrupt safe. So you've got this wall. How do you smash through it? Well, back in 1975, the government tried a pretty radical, almost surgical approach. It was called Presidential Decree 749. The whole idea was to target this one very specific problem with a very sharp instrument. And the thinking behind this decree was, well, brutally practical. It basically says that it's better by far to let the person who gave the bribe go free than to let the corrupt official who took the bribe get away with it. It was a pragmatic choice for sure, and maybe a little controversial. You sacrifice the smaller player to get the bigger one. So the main tool they decided to use was something called legal immunity. And what is that exactly? Well, it's not a pardon, not really. It's more like a deal. The state basically comes to you and says, look, your testimony is more valuable to us than locking you up. Tell us everything you know, and we promise we won't charge you for this specific crime. But, this wasn't just a free-for-all. There were some really strict conditions. First off, the crime had to have actually been completed. Second, your testimony had to be absolutely essential to get a conviction. Also, you couldn't just tell the government something they already knew. It had to be new information. And this is a big one. Your story had to be backed up by other evidence. Oh, and you had to have a relatively clean record yourself. All of that was put in place to make sure the system wasn't taken advantage of. But that decree, that was really just the beginning. Think of it like having a single key for one very specific lock, the lock of bribery. Fast forward 16 years, and the government realized it didn't just need one key. It needed a whole ring of keys and, a whole security system to go with it. The solution had to get bigger. And you can really see that evolution when you look at the timeline. In 1975, you have this super focused decree, but by 1991, with Republic Act 6981, it had blossomed into a full-blown witness protection program. The whole mindset shifted from just getting testimony to creating a system that protects witnesses in any serious crime.
I mean, just look at the difference side by side. It's night and day. The focus went from just bribery cases to any grave felony. It wasn't only for bribe-givers anymore, it was for any witness to a crime. And the main benefit? It wasn't just immunity anymore. Now the state was offering a whole package: security, money to live on, and immunity. It's a whole different ballgame.
So yeah, this was a huge leap forward. It created what's officially called the Witness Protection, Security, and Benefit Program. And that name says it all, right? It was about creating a complete shield for anyone brave enough to step up and do the right thing. Okay, so we're talking about a shield, but what does that actually mean? What are you really getting if you're inside the Witness Protection Program, the WPP?
Well, it turns out it's incredibly comprehensive. I mean, we're talking about the whole shebang. You get secure housing, maybe even a new home in a new town. You get financial help so you can actually live. Your job is protected by law. If you get hurt because you testified, your medical bills are covered. And in the absolute worst case scenario, the program even takes care of your family. And to really drive home how high the stakes are, the law gets super specific about this. It actually guarantees a minimum burial benefit to the family of a witness who's killed because of their testimony. This tells you it's not just a legal document, it's a life and death support system. But look, this isn't some one-way street. It's not a free pass. To get all of this protection, you've got to hold up your end of the deal. Witnesses have to sign a formal agreement promising to testify truthfully, to cooperate completely with the police, and, this is super important, to keep all the details about their protection top secret. In all of this, the deals, the protection, the secrets, it really boils down to one big thorny question at the very heart of it all. What's the real price of justice?
When you look at the whole story, from that very narrow decree in 1975 to the massive program we see from 1991, you see a system being built based on one really difficult choice. You have to protect one person involved in the crime in order to convict another.
And that's really the question I want to leave you with. Is this a necessary evil? Is it worth it to grant immunity and protection, sometimes to people who broke the law themselves, in order to hold the most powerful people accountable? It's a tough one, and definitely something worth thinking about.
Imagine you are a mid-level accountant at a massive, sprawling logistics firm.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And it's late on a Friday, the office is completely empty, and you're just trying to reconcile a few final vendor accounts before the weekend. And then you click into a restricted folder by mistake, and there it is.
The smoking gun.
Exactly. A secondary ledger, plain as day. It proves that the CEO of your company, along with the city's mayor, has been systematically laundering millions of dollars for an international cartel.
Oh, wow. That is a terrifying Friday afternoon.
You freeze. Because, I mean, you know what you're looking at, but more importantly, you know that if you go to the authorities, the prosecutor is going to beg you to testify. They need you.
They absolutely do.
But you also know the mayor has the chief of police in his pocket. You know the cartel has eyes everywhere. They know where you live. They know where your kids go to school.
Yeah, it is the ultimate nightmare scenario for a civilian. You are suddenly holding the thread that could unravel this massive criminal enterprise, but, well, pulling that thread could very easily get you killed.
Exactly. So the fundamental question we're looking at today is, how does a government actually buy your truth when the price of that truth is literally your life?
Right.
Because relying on people to just, do the right thing out of a sense of civic duty is a terrible strategy when car bombs are on the table. The state needs a mechanism to pull you out of the shadows, protect you, and put you on the stand.
We often fall into the trap of thinking about justice as this clean, inevitable binary concept. Like we think in terms of right and wrong, the good guys and the bad guys.
Yeah, the movie version of justice.
Precisely. But when you look at the actual architecture of how criminal syndicates or deeply corrupt political machines operate, that clean binary just shatters completely. The state realizes very quickly that you cannot dismantle a sophisticated conspiracy from the outside looking in.
Because they build walls to prevent exactly that.
Yes. You need someone on the inside to open the door. And to get that person to talk, the state has to make some incredibly uncomfortable, deeply pragmatic compromises.
And those compromises are exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to this deep dive. We are taking a magnifying glass to the anatomy of legal protection immunity, and the hidden rulebook of the justice system.
It's a fascinating hidden world.
It really is. For you listening, whether you're fascinated by the law, prepping for a debate on ethics, or just insanely curious about how the world actually works behind closed doors, our mission today is to map out the precise mechanics the state uses to secure a witness.
Going into the weeds.
Oh, deep into the weeds. We're going to explore the strict hurdles you have to clear, the genuinely life-altering benefits the government will throw at you, and the incredibly severe penalties involved in turning a terrified bystander, or in some cases a guilty accomplice, into the state's star witness.
To do this, we are looking at an incredible stack of source material, specifically 2 foundational legal documents from the Philippines. These documents offer a literal masterclass in how a government attempts to engineer truth.
Right, 2 very different eras of law.
Exactly. First, we're going to look at Presidential Decree number 749, which dates back to 1975. Then, we are going to jump forward 16 years and examine the sweeping machinery of Republic Act number 6981.
Better known as the Witness Protection, Security, and Benefit Act of 1991.
That's the one.
And the contrast between these 2 documents is going to absolutely blow your mind. You are going to see a state desperately trying to plug holes in a sinking ship, realizing their initial fixes aren't enough, and eventually having to build an entirely new ship from scratch.
Because there is an inherent, almost agonizing tension here. I mean, society has a profound desire to punish a crime. But to prove that crime happened, you absolutely need the help of someone intimately involved with it.
Right.
These documents lay out the exact legal justification for making deals with a smaller devil to catch an even bigger devil.
I love that framing. The smaller devil for the bigger devil. So let's jump right into the time machine and head back to July 18th, 1975. Ferdinand E. Marcos is the president of the Philippines, and he issues Presidential Decree number 749.
A very specific point in history.
Yeah. Now, right at the top of this decree, the text establishes a foundational philosophical principle. It says, quote, "Public office is a public trust. Public officers are but servants of the people, whom they must serve with utmost fidelity and integrity."
It sounds very noble.
It does. It sounds like the kind of thing you carve into marble above a courthouse. But immediately after stating that beautiful ideal, the document admits to a massive, systemic, paralyzing failure.
Yes, it really pivots. The decree openly acknowledges that it had become virtually impossible to secure the conviction and removal of dishonest, corrupt public servants.
Virtually impossible.
And the drafters of the decree pinpointed exactly why. It comes down to the mechanics of bribery. A bribe is a closed loop.
Okay, a closed loop.
Right. It requires 2 parties. You have the public official receiving the illicit gift and the citizen or business person giving it.
So if I hand a billing inspector an envelope of cash to ignore a faulty foundation, we are both in the room. We both know what happened.
Precisely. Now, if the state wants to convict that corrupt building inspector, they need evidence. Usually, the best evidence is the testimony of the person who handed over the envelope.
The guy with the cash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But put yourself in the shoes of that person. Why on earth would you ever take the witness stand? If you sit in a courtroom and admit, under oath, to giving a bribe, you are actively confessing to a serious crime.
Right, because giving the bribe is just as illegal as taking it.
Exactly. The moment you step down from the stand, the prosecutor would just hand you an indictment for bribery. You would be convicted on your own admission.
It's mutually assured destruction.
That's exactly what it is.
It's the classic bribe-givers dilemma. Everyone keeps their mouth shut because opening it guarantees a prison sentence for both of them. The official stays quiet to keep the money and the power, and the citizen stays quiet to stay out of jail. It is a perfect, impenetrable wall of silence.
And that wall of silence is what was destroying the integrity of the public trust. So the 1975 decree introduces a radical surgical solution. The state essentially steps into the middle of this mutually assured destruction and cuts the wire.
How so?
The decree states that if you voluntarily give information about a public official violating anti-graft and corruption laws, and you willingly testify against them, the state will grant you absolute exemption from prosecution or punishment for your part in that specific offense.
Right, absolutely. So they are granting total immunity to the bribe giver.
Total. Even the accomplices who helped arrange the bribe get immunity. The state is just saying, we don't care that you broke the law. We are wiping your slate clean just to get to the official.
That is a massive concession.
It is. The text of the decree explicitly spells out the utilitarian math behind this decision. It's fascinating to read a law that explains its own internal logic so clearly.
What does it say?
It argues that it is, quote, Better by far and more socially desirable, as well as just, that the bribe or gift giver be granted immunity from prosecution than that the official who receives the bribe should be allowed to go free, insolently remaining in public office and continuing with his nefarious and corrupt practices.
Insolently remaining in public office. You can really feel the visceral frustration of the drafters bleeding through the legal jargon there.
Oh, absolutely.
They were sick of seeing these guys parading around City Hall knowing they were untouchable.
It is a cold, calculated admission by the state. They are legally recognizing that a corrupt public official, someone who can manipulate zoning laws, siphon tax dollars, or compromise the safety of a city, is vastly more dangerous to the fabric of society than a corrupt private citizen who paid to skip a bureaucratic line.
Right, the scale of the damage is different.
Therefore, the state is willing to let the guilty citizen walk completely free in order to surgically remove the rot from the public office.
I see it like a high-stakes game of chess.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, in chess, if you want to win, you can't just try to keep all your pieces safe. Sometimes you have to look at the board, identify a strategic opening, and deliberately sacrifice one of your own pieces. You push a knight or a bishop forward, knowing your opponent is going to take it, because that sacrifice opens up a direct lane to capture the opponent's queen.
That's a great analogy.
The state is looking at the board, seeing the corrupt public official as the queen, and deciding that intentionally abandoning the prosecution of the bribe giver, sacrificing that pawn, is the only strategic move that wins the game.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The state is sacrificing a smaller victory for a systemic one. But, as with any aggressive chess strategy, there are massive risks.
Right.
If you sacrifice your knight and fail to take the queen, you're just losing pieces. And the state knew this. They weren't just handing out these total immunity passes to anyone who walked into a police station with a rumor.
Yeah, they had to build in a filter. Because if you just announce, hey, anyone who admits to bribery gets off scot-free as long as they point a finger at a politician, you are going to get an absolute circus.
All chaos.
So the decree lays out 5 incredibly strict conditions. And these aren't, pick 2 out of 5. All 5 conditions must be met simultaneously for this immunity to kick in. Let's walk through the mechanics of these because they reveal exactly how the state tries to protect itself from being played.
Let's do it. Condition number 1 is perhaps the most fundamental. The information must refer to a consummated violation, meaning the bribe actually happened completely.
So it can't just be an attempt. If I say, hey, the mayor asked me for $1 million, but I refused, that doesn't count.
Exactly. Or if you say, my business partners and I were discussing paying off a customs agent, but we haven't done it yet. The state is not granting you absolute immunity for an attempt or a conspiracy to commit a bribe.
Okay.
The crime must be complete. The money must have changed hands. The state only wants to trigger this extraordinary legal mechanism when a verifiable, completed offense has damaged the public trust.
That makes sense. You don't get the ultimate shield just for thinking about a crime.
Right.
Okay, condition number 2. The testimony must be absolutely necessary for the conviction of the public officer.
This is the state being frugal with its power. Immunity is an incredibly expensive currency in the justice system.
Yeah.
I mean, the prosecutor is essentially letting a criminal go.
Yeah, it's a big pill to swallow.
So if the state can secure a conviction against that corrupt building inspector using bank records, wiretaps, surveillance footage, or an undercover agent, they are not going to grant you immunity. They don't need you. They only buy what they absolutely cannot win without.
Okay, so if the prosecutor has a recording of the official demanding the cash, they can just prosecute both of you. You only get the deal if you are the only key to the lock.
Exactly.
Which ties directly into condition number 3. The information and testimony cannot already be in the possession of the state.
This is a timing mechanism. It creates a race to the prosecutor's office. You cannot sit back, wait for a massive corruption scandal to break on the evening news, realize you're going to get caught in the dragnet, and then run to the authorities to confirm what they already know while demanding immunity.
I see.
You have to be bringing fresh, essential, previously unknown evidence to the table. If they already have the ledger, your confession doesn't earn you a free pass.
So the state is rewarding the initiator. They want people to come forward before the investigation even starts.
Right. They want to be proactive.
Okay, condition number 4 is fascinating because it acts as a vital quality control mechanism. The law states that the information has to be capable of being corroborated on its material points.
This is crucial. The justice system is terrified of the he said, she said scenario.
Sure.
If you walk in and say, I handed the governor a briefcase full of unmarked bills in a dark alley with no cameras and no witnesses, the state cannot do much with that. Even if you are telling the truth, a defense attorney will just shred your uncorroborated testimony in front of a judge.
They need more than just your word.
There needs to be a paper trail. There needs to be withdrawn bank statements matching the date of the meeting. There needs to be phone logs or a driver who can place you at the scene, or an email chain discussing a quote-unquote consulting fee.
Yeah.
You have to provide the foundational evidence that backs up your core claims. The state will not grant immunity based on a ghost story.
You have to bring receipts, literally.
Literally, yes.
And finally, condition number 5. The informant or witness cannot have been previously convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude.
Yes. Moral turpitude.
I have always loved that legal phrase. It sounds so Dickensian. But what does it actually mean in practice? How does a prosecutor define moral turpitude when deciding to grant immunity?
It is a specific legal classification. It essentially refers to crimes that are inherently base, vile, or depraved, contrary to the accepted rules of morality and the duties a person owes to society. But in the context of being a witness, it is really about inherent deceit.
So give me an example. Let's say I got into a massive bar fight 5 years ago and I was convicted of assault. Does that disqualify me?
Generally, no. Simple assault is a crime of passion, impulse, or anger. It doesn't necessarily mean you are a liar.
Okay.
But if your previous conviction was for forgery, embezzlement, perjury, or massive fraud, those are crimes of moral turpitude. They involve calculated deceit. The state's logic is highly practical here. If you have a documented history of being a fundamentally dishonest person who defrauds others, your credibility on the witness stand is zero.
The jury wouldn't buy it.
A defense attorney will simply point to your forgery conviction and tell the judge, this person lies for a living. Why would you believe them now?
So the state is demanding a credible criminal. We will forgive you for this specific bribe, but if your rap sheet shows you are a pathological liar, your word is useless to us and the deal is off.
Exactly.
Right.
That's a very fine needle to thread. They need someone involved in the mud, but not so muddy that the judge can't see their face.
All right, so you have these 5 strict conditions. But as I'm reading this 1975 decree, I keep thinking about the sheer destructive potential of this law.
How so?
Let's say I am a ruthless politician, a real Machiavellian operator, and I want to absolutely destroy my rival who currently holds public office. What is to stop me from weaponizing this decree? I have endless resources. I could just find a low-level crony, pay them a massive sum of money to walk into a prosecutor's office, and have them claim they gave my rival a massive bribe.
A fabricated scandal.
Exactly.
Right.
Even if it's a total lie, my rival is suddenly under a cloud of suspicion. The media gets wind of an investigation, their career is stalled, their donors pull out, and they are tied up in legal defense. And since the crony who made the claim supposedly gets immunity under this decree, aren't we just incentivizing political smears? It seems like a massive loophole.
It's an incredibly astute observation, and it's exactly the kind of vulnerability the drafters of the decree were terrified of. You cannot create a weapon this powerful without a safety catch.
No.
That is why sections 2 and 3 of the decree were written. The law actively anticipates bad faith weaponization. Section 2 clearly states that the immunity is conditional. It completely vanishes if it turns out the testimony is false, malicious, or made merely for the purpose of harassing or prejudicing the public officer.
So it's not a permanent, impenetrable shield.
Far from it. If the state determines you are lying, the recoil is devastating. Not only does the state instantly revoke your immunity and prosecute you for perjury, but the law explicitly entitles the falsely accused public officer to launch their own civil and criminal actions against you.
Ouch.
You open yourself up to absolute financial and legal ruin. You become the target of the state and the target of the person you tried to smear.
Okay, so there is a severe penalty for crying wolf. I get that. But my ruthless politician scenario doesn't care about the crony. I expect the crony to go down eventually. My goal was just to ruin the rival's reputation by launching the investigation in the first place. The damage is done the moment the accusation hits the public record.
And that is where Section 3 comes into play, providing a highly specific structural safeguard against the smear campaign. Section 3 mandates that all preliminary investigations conducted by a judge, a prosecutor, or a committee must be kept strictly confidential and private.
What does that mean mechanically? The press isn't allowed in.
It means the investigation happens in a black box.
Yeah.
The explicit purpose, as written in the text, is to protect the reputation of the official under investigation, just in case the report proves to be unfounded or if no prima facie case is established.
Hold on. Prima facie, let's break that down for those of us who didn't spend 3 years in law school. That essentially means at first glance or on the face of it, right?
Yes.
Meaning there is enough basic foundational evidence to justify moving forward with a real trial.
Precisely. Before a full public trial can happen, the state has to look at the evidence and say, is there enough here to even bother? That is the preliminary investigation. By making that step completely confidential, the state is saying, we will investigate this explosive claim thoroughly, but we will do it behind closed doors.
That kills the media circus.
Exactly. If we look at the evidence and realize this is a politically motivated lie with no prima facie evidence, we dismiss it quietly. The public never even knows the official was accused. The political rival's plan to use the media as a weapon is neutralized because there is nothing for the media to report on.
That is genuinely clever. The state protects itself from being used as a tool for political assassination by removing the oxygen from the rumor mill.
It's very well thought out.
But let's step back and look at the reality of what this 1975 decree actually accomplishes for our hypothetical whistleblower. Let's say they meet all 5 conditions, they are telling the truth, and the case goes to trial. The decree offers them absolute legal immunity. It says, we will not put you in a prison cell for bribery. But what glaring problem remains?
The physical reality of the threat?
Exactly. It offers exactly 0 protection against a bullet. If I am testifying against a corrupt governor who has ties to violent syndicates, keeping me out of a legal jail cell doesn't help me if that governor sends thugs to my house to silence me before the trial even begins.
Right.
The decree essentially says, good news, you aren't going to prison. Bad news, you might not survive the week. Legal safety is absolutely not physical safety.
And that profound realization is a crucial pivot point in this history. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the landscape of crime had shifted. It became violently apparent to the state that simply promising not to prosecute a witness was laughably insufficient.
Paper shields don't stop real threats.
Exactly. If the threat of assassination, kidnapping, or severe physical harm is looming over a witness, a piece of paper granting legal immunity is essentially worthless. The state realized that if they wanted the truth, they didn't just have to forgive the witness, they had to physically hide them, protect them, and sustain them.
Which brings us to the massive sweeping structural evolution enacted 16 years later. We are moving from a simple decree about bribery into the architecture of a massive, heavily funded government machine.
This is a huge leap.
In 1991, the 8th Congress passes Republic Act number 6981, known as the Witness Protection, Security, and Benefit Act. And right away in Section 2, you see how seriously the government is taking this. They place this entirely new program under the direct authority of the Department of Justice, the DOJ.
Right.
But they don't stop there. The law gives the DOJ the power to call upon any other government department, bureau, agency, or instrumentality to help them run it, and those agencies are under a legal obligation to assist.
That provision is staggering when you think about government bureaucracy. This isn't just a side project for a few prosecutors at the DOJ. It is a whole-of-government mandate.
They can just commandeer what they need.
Yes. If the DOJ needs the Department of Health to quietly treat a witness or the Department of Labor to handle an employment issue, those departments cannot refuse. The DOJ becomes the supreme commander of this specific mission.
To understand the sheer, overwhelming scale of this program, we have to look at the admission criteria outlined in Section 3, because they aren't going to mobilize the entire government for, petty theft.
No, definitely not.
To even be considered for this level of protection, you must have witnessed or have knowledge of the commission of a crime, and you must be willing to testify. But the offense must be a grave felony as defined under the revised penal code or its equivalent under special laws.
We are talking about the apex predators of the criminal code. Murder, kidnapping for ransom, large-scale drug trafficking, massive syndicated corruption. The heavy hitters. The state is only invoking this program when the crimes threaten the foundational safety of society.
And just like the 1975 decree, your testimony still has to be substantially corroborated on its material points. They aren't going to put you in a safe house based on a feeling.
Right.
But the real core of Section 3, the thing that separates it from the old decree, is the threat assessment. You must be subjected to threats to your life or bodily injury, or there must be a likelihood that you will be killed, forced, intimidated, harassed, or corrupted to prevent you from testifying.
What is truly fascinating here is how the state scientifically and legally defines the circle of vulnerability. The law understands that intimidation rarely starts with the witness directly. It's often much more effective to threaten what the witness loves.
That's dark, but true.
So the law doesn't just protect the witness. It explicitly extends physical protection to any member of their family within the second civil degree of consanguinity or affinity.
Okay, let's pause and break that down, because second civil degree of consanguinity or affinity sounds incredibly dense. If I am the witness sitting across from a prosecutor, what does that actually mean in plain English? Who gets to come to the safe house with me?
It is the state drawing a literal, unyielding boundary around who legally matters in a threat assessment. Let's map it out. Consanguinity means blood relations. Affinity means relations by marriage.
Okay, blood and marriage.
The degrees are calculated by generations. So start with you, the witness. 1 degree up is your parents, 1 degree down is your children. That is the first civil degree.
Got it.
Now go one more step.
Yeah.
2 degrees up, your grandparents. 2 degrees down, your grandchildren.
Yeah.
And 2 degrees laterally, your siblings.
And affinity includes my spouse's family.
Yes, your spouse's parents and your spouse's siblings fall within that boundary.
That is a chillingly practical understanding of how criminal syndicates actually operate. The state is openly acknowledging that a cartel might try to silence me by threatening to murder my brother or my grandmother or my mother-in-law. They don't just come for you, they come for your bloodline.
They absolutely do.
And the state is willing to scoop up that entire generational web and hide them.
Precisely. The state has to cast a wide net because the syndicates cast a wide net.
Yeah.
However, there is a very specific and somewhat controversial carve-out in Section 3 that we must discuss.
Yeah.
The law enforcement exception.
Yeah.
The law clearly states that a person cannot be admitted into the program if they are a law enforcement officer, even if they are testifying against a cartel, or even worse, testifying against a deeply entrenched ring of other corrupt law enforcement officers.
Wait, why? That seems entirely backwards. If a good cop is trying to take down a precinct full of dirty cops, aren't they in the most immediate, severe danger of all? The dirty cops know where they work, they know their patrol routes, they have access to their files. Why would the state abandon them?
It's a brutal reality, and they absolutely are in profound danger. But the philosophical logic the law applies here is that law enforcement officers are the designated protective mechanism of the state. When you swear the oath and put on the uniform, you are explicitly accepting the inherent dangers of upholding the law.
You signed up for the risk.
Exactly. Providing a police officer with a civilian witness protection program creates a paradox. The state expects the protectors to protect themselves, usually through internal affairs divisions or specialized operational security within the force.
But the law isn't entirely heartless, right?
Correct. The drafters recognize the terrifying vulnerability of the officer's family. So the law specifies that while the officer themselves cannot be admitted into the program, the immediate members of their family may avail themselves of the protection.
So the cop stays out in the open?
Yes. The state says to the officer, you have to stand your ground and fight the corruption. We will not hide you, but we will take your children and your spouse, and we will make sure they are untouchable.
That is an incredibly heavy burden to place on someone.
Unimaginable.
So let's say you meet all these criteria. You witnessed a grave felony, you are facing genuine, verifiable threats, you aren't a cop, and your testimony is corroborated. You don't just get handed the keys to a safe house and a pat on the back.
Far from it.
Section 5 details the Memorandum of Agreement, or the MOA. Before you get a single ounce of protection, you must sign a legally binding contract with the government outlining your strict, non-negotiable responsibilities. And reading through the clauses of this MOA, it sounds less like a protection program and more like entering a high-stakes, deeply regimented monastery where the Department of Justice is the abbot.
It is a profoundly restrictive document, by design. The state is taking on monumental risk, so they demand monumental compliance. The MOA requires you to pledge to testify in all appropriate proceedings. You must actively avoid the commission of any crime. You have to take all necessary precautions to avoid detection by others.
Which means your old life is dead. You cannot call your best friend on their birthday. You cannot log into your old social media accounts just to see what people are saying. One digital slip-up could expose the safe house.
Exactly. You must cooperate with all reasonable requests from the government employees protecting you, and you must regularly, meticulously inform the program officials of your current activities and your address if you are relocated.
And here is where I want to push back on the reality of this contract, because one of the clauses in that MOA requires the witness to, quote, comply with legal obligations and civil judgments against him. So let's play this out. I am a witness. I am terrified, living in a government safe house, trying to adapt to a new reality. Prior to all this, I had a complex life. I had a mortgage. I had credit cards. Maybe I was involved in a civil lawsuit over a property dispute.
Okay, real world problem.
Right. If I accidentally default on a civil debt like missing a series of credit card payments because I'm hiding from a cartel and my assets are frozen, am I in violation of the agreement? Because Section 6 says that a substantial breach of the MOA is grounds for the termination of protection. Can the government legally just cancel my protection, kick me out onto the street, and throw me to the wolves over a missed visa payment?
It is a stark, terrifying reality, but yes, technically they can. The law allows for termination based on a substantial breach. However, Section 6 does provide a procedural safeguard to prevent arbitrary cruelty.
What's the safeguard?
The Secretary of Justice must send a formal notice of termination, stating the specific reasons, before pulling the plug. It's not usually an instantaneous eviction without warning. They give you a chance to rectify the breach.
Okay, so a warning first.
Yes. But to understand why the state demands such total subservience and strict adherence to civil laws, you have to look at the liability. The government is expending massive resources and taking on total legal and moral liability for your existence. They cannot, under any circumstances, be in the business of harboring someone who is actively using their state-funded anonymity to defraud creditors or ignore civil judgments. The safe house cannot become a sanctuary for civil deadbeats.
That makes sense from a purely liability standpoint, even if it feels harsh to the terrified witness. And the secrecy surrounding this entire operation is absolute. Section 7 dictates that all proceedings regarding application and admission to the program are strictly confidential.
Absolute silence.
If anyone, a clerk, a guard, a prosecutor, leaks information or documents about a witness without a written order from the DOJ or a court, the penalties are designed to destroy them.
Very severe. A conviction for violating that confidentiality results in mandatory imprisonment of not less than 1 year, stretching up to 6 years.
That's serious jail time.
Furthermore, if a public official is the one who leaks the information, they are permanently deprived of the right to hold public office or employment for a period of 5 years. The state considers bullying a witness's cover to be a devastating crime, akin to treason against the justice process.
Which is entirely logical because, as you mentioned, the resources being poured into keeping this person hidden are staggering. Let's transition into exactly what the state is paying for, because this is where the law becomes truly fascinating. We are looking at Section 8 of the Act, Rights and Benefits.
The itemized price tag on truth.
Exactly. And reading through it, it reads less like a justice initiative and more like a bizarre, all-inclusive, highly secure life insurance policy underwritten by the federal government.
It is incredibly pragmatic legislation. The drafters sat down and mapped out every single psychological and economic reason why a person would refuse to testify. And Section 8 is meticulously designed to systematically neutralize every single one of those excuses.
Let's walk through the logistics of these benefits, because the how is just as wild as the what. First, the law states the witness has the right to a secure housing facility until the threat is reduced to a manageable or tolerable level. And if circumstances warrant it, they are entitled to full relocation and even a change of personal identity, all at the expense of the program.
A completely clean slate.
And again, this extends to their family. Walk me through the mechanics of that. Changing an identity isn't just printing a new ID card.
No, it is an administrative labyrinth. Changing an identity means the state has to legally fabricate a past. They have to generate new birth certificates, new social security numbers, new academic records that will hold up to a background check if the person applies for a job in their new life.
Wow, even school transcripts.
Everything. They have to seamlessly transfer medical histories without revealing the previous name. It requires deep, highly classified coordination between the DOJ, the Census Bureau, the tax authority, and local municipalities.
It's like building a human from scratch on paper.
So when the witness says, "I fear for my physical safety," the state says, "Handled. We will literally erase who you were and mathematically build you a new life."
Then look at the economic protections. These address the financial terror of whistleblowing. A major reason people don't testify is the fear of losing their income and starving their families.
Right. Practical realities.
The law mandates that the department must assist the witness in obtaining a means of livelihood. If you're relocated, you get financial assistance for your support and your family's support. But the protections for a witness who keeps their current job are incredible. The law explicitly forbids an employer from removing or demoting a witness because they are absent from work due to their witness duties, like attending long trials or depositions.
This is where the law clashes with corporate reality.
Exactly. Walk me through that. I'm the CEO of a private logistics firm. My lead accountant vanishes on a Tuesday. I need that position filled. 3 weeks later, I get a vague, highly classified letter from the Department of Justice saying, "Your accountant is unavailable. Do not fire him. Keep his position open."
Yeah. Good luck dealing with that.
That is a massive operational disruption. How does the government enforce this without breaking the witness's cover?
It requires extreme delicacy. The DOJ issues a formal certification to the employer within 30 days. It is a legal mandate, not a request. The employer is bound by law to hold the position.
But the business still suffers.
But the state also recognizes the financial burden this places on the witness who isn't clocking hours. So, the law dictates that any witness who fails to report to work because of witness duty will have their equivalent salaries or wages paid by the program.
So the government literally steps in, looks at your pay stub, and writes you a check for your daily wage so you don't lose a dime while sitting in a safe house preparing for trial.
Yes. But to your point about the CEO needing to run a business, the drafters understood that they couldn't hold private companies hostage forever.
Okay, good.
The law states that in cases of prolonged transfer or permanent relocation, where the witness is clearly never coming back to their old desk, the employer eventually has the option to remove the witness from employment. But they can only do so after securing formal clearance from both the DOJ and the Department of Labor and Employment.
So there's a process for it.
They balance the total protection of the witness with the eventual operational reality of a business needing to fill a permanently vacant role.
The logistics of that are mind-boggling. And the benefits keep going. The law covers reasonable traveling expenses and subsistence allowances for attending court. If you are relocated 3 islands away, the state pays for your secure transport back for the trial.
Right.
It guarantees free medical treatment and hospitalization at any private or public hospital for any injury or illness incurred because of witness duty. The program foots the bill. Fear of medical bankruptcy from a syndicate attack. Covered.
But the most sobering provisions deal with the ultimate worst-case scenario. What happens if the state's protection fails? What happens if the witness is killed?
Right. And here's where I really want to look at the numbers and push back on the state's calculus. The law states that if a witness is killed, their heirs get a burial benefit of not less than 10,000 pesos, which is exclusive of other benefits they might be entitled to.
Okay, let's look at that.
10,000 pesos. Let's keep in mind, this law was written in 1991, so the economic value of a peso is different. But even adjusting for inflation, setting a statutory floor of 10,000 pesos for literally sacrificing your life for the state. It feels coldly transactional. It feels like the state saying, thanks for your testimony. Here is the bare minimum for a pine casket.
I completely understand that reaction. It feels offensively low when you measure it against the value of a human life. However, from a legal architecture standpoint, that 10,000 pesos serves purely as a statutory minimum, a floor, to guarantee immediate liquidity for a funeral, not a ceiling on compensation.
Still, it's pretty grim.
It is. But the true weight of the state's compensation, the actual apology for failing to protect the witness, is found in the next paragraph. This is the generational promise.
What is that?
If a witness dies or is permanently incapacitated, their minor or dependent children are entitled to free education from primary school all the way through college level in any state or private school, college, or university, as long as they qualify.
Okay, that changes the math entirely. The state steps in and completely assumes the role of the ultimate provider for the children's educational future. It neutralizes the most profound psychological hurdle a parent faces. If I die, my children will be destitute.
Exactly.
The state says, if you die for us, your children will go to college on our dime wherever they get in.
It is a profound, decades-long commitment. The state is promising to fund a child's entire intellectual development as payment for their parents' sacrifice. And to further reduce the psychological strain on the witness while they are alive, Section 9 mandates a speedy trial.
A speedy trial.
It requires the judicial body to endeavor to finish the proceeding within 3 months from the filing of the case.
Now, wait a minute. Is a 3-month trial for a grave felony We are talking about organized crime, massive corruption, multiple defendants, mountains of evidence. Is that actually a realistic legal timeline? Or is the state just making shiny promises it can't possibly keep to coax terrified people out of hiding and onto the stand? Anyone who watches the news knows that major syndicate trials can drag on for years through appeals and delays.
It's a very fair critique of the system's actual capacity. The word endeavor is the operative legal safety valve in that sentence.
Endeavor.
It's a mandate of intent rather than an absolute ironclad deadline that results in an automatic dismissal if missed.
The state acknowledges that keeping a human being in the high-stress, deeply restrictive, isolated environment of witness protection for 3 or 4 years is inhumane, psychologically damaging, and often counterproductive to their reliability on the stand.
They'd just break down.
So the law forces the courts to prioritize these specific cases, pushing them to the top of the docket, compelling judges to limit granting delays to defense attorneys. They try to sprint through the trial. So, up to this point, we have painted a picture of a state bending over backward, spending massive amounts of money, coordinating entire government agencies, and offering sweeping generational guarantees to protect an innocent bystander who just happened to see something terrible.
Ideal scenario.
It's a noble effort. But everything we just talked about gets infinitely more complicated and ethically murky when we move to the next phase of the law, because the rules change drastically when the person the state is protecting was actually in on the crime. We are talking about the state witness.
This is where we return to the core tension we discussed at the very beginning with the 1975 Marcos Decree, the absolute necessity of forgiving a criminal to catch a bigger criminal. The 1991 law had to build a mechanism for this.
Right.
Section 10 applies to a person who has actively participated in the commission of a grave felony but desires to testify for the state.
The law lays out incredibly tight circumstances that must be present to admit an accused criminal into the program. The offense must be a grave felony. There must be an absolute necessity for their testimony. There can be no other direct evidence available for the prosecution. Their testimony must be substantially corroborated. They cannot have a previous conviction for moral turpitude. We've seen these concepts before.
Yes, very similar filters.
But the absolute centerpiece of this criteria, the phrase that carries the weight of the entire justice system, is the requirement that the person does not appear to be most guilty.
Let's truly unpack that phrase, because does not appear to be most guilty represents the dark, pragmatic, beating heart of the justice system's compromise.
How so?
I want you to notice what it does not say. It does not say is innocent. It does not say was forced to do it under duress. It explicitly, legally acknowledges that this person is guilty of a grave felony.
They did the crime.
They might have driven the getaway car in an armed robbery that ended in murder. They might have physically carried the briefcases of laundered cash to the offshore bank for the cartel boss. They are criminal.
Right.
But as long as the prosecutor can look at the hierarchy of the syndicate, analyze the flow of orders, and determine that this person is a lieutenant, and the person they are testifying against is the kingpin who orchestrated the violence, the state will make the deal.
It's the ultimate interrogation room scenario. The detectives slide a coffee across the table to the getaway driver and say, "We know you were there. We have your tire tracks, but give us the guy who pulled the trigger, give us the architect of the heist, and you walk."
Exactly.
And the mechanism for this is laid out in Section 12. Once the DOJ evaluates the hierarchy and certifies them for the program, the prosecutor petitions the court to formally discharge them from the criminal complaint.
A formal discharge.
If the judge agrees, that admission entitles the state witness to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for that specific offense, plus every single one of those massive benefits we just talked about. Free housing, a new identity, their salary paid, their kids' college funded.
It is an incredible bargain for the criminal.
Yeah.
But the state does not hand over that kind of golden ticket without a massive catch.
There's always a catch.
And the catch is absolute leverage. Which brings us to Section 14, compelled testimony. This is where the legal mechanics get aggressive and where the state bears its teeth.
I read this part.
The law states that any witness admitted into the program cannot refuse to testify or produce evidence on the ground of the constitutional right against self-incrimination.
This blew my mind when I read it. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It guarantees that you cannot be forced to testify against yourself. It's the right to remain silent, the Fifth Amendment equivalent. How can a mere statutory law override a foundational constitutional right? How is that not immediately struck down by the Supreme Court?
Because of the precise surgical nature of the immunity being granted. You have to look at why the constitutional right exists.
Okay, why?
The right against self-incrimination exists specifically to prevent the state from torturing or forcing you to provide the very evidence they will use to put you in a prison cell. It protects you from being the architect of your own demise.
Right, to stop coerced confessions.
But once the state grants you absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for the offense in question, meaning they legally, permanently cannot punish you for it no matter what you say, you are no longer in danger of incriminating yourself.
Oh.
Because the threat of prosecution has been legally erased by the immunity. The constitutional right to remain silent regarding that specific crime is effectively voided. You have no legal basis to stay quiet because you have no legal jeopardy to fear.
So the state sits across from the state witness and says, we took away your risk. We erased your prison sentence. So we are taking away your right to remain silent. You must talk.
That's the deal.
But human beings are complicated. Fear is complicated. Let's say you are that getaway driver. You made the deal. You are sitting in the secure housing facility. But the night before the trial, you watch a news report about how the cartel just firebombed the house of a rival. You realize the cartel's reach is longer than the state's. You panic.
A very real possibility.
You look at the prosecutor and say, I can't do it. I won't take the stand. I'll take my chances on the street.
Right.
What actually happens to you?
The consequences are immediate, severe, and designed to induce panic in the opposite direction. If a registered witness fails or refuses to testify without just cause, they are immediately prosecuted for contempt of court.
Just boom, contempt.
If they take the stand and testify falsely or suddenly develop amnesia and become evasive to protect the cartel, they face prosecution for perjury. But for a state witness, the criminal who made a deal, it is catastrophic.
What happens?
The court holds a summary hearing. Their immunity is entirely revoked. They lose every single right and benefit of the program, and they are suddenly immediately subject to criminal prosecution for the original grave felony they committed.
And the law outlines exactly how they handle the physical reality of a witness who refuses to speak. Section 14 dictates that the court will order the arrest and detention of the witness. And they don't just put them in the local county lockup. The law specifically says they will be detained in any jail contiguous to the place of trial or investigation until they are willing to give the testimony.
Contiguous, meaning right next door, sharing a wall.
Exactly. Paint that picture. The trial of the cartel boss is happening in the courtroom 101. The state drags you, the terrified witness, into a holding cell in room 102. You can hear the gavel. You can hear the lawyers. The state is literally holding you in a pressure cooker.
That's intense.
By stripping away the right against self-incrimination and holding an immediate prison sentence over their head in the room next door, isn't the witness protection program essentially using extortion? The state is basically saying, we own your freedom, we own your physical location, now you must perform.
It is entirely coercive by deliberate design. The state is utilizing its maximum coercive legal power over the witness. But we have to remember the ecosystem this is happening in.
Right.
The state is in a desperate tug of war for the witness's testimony against the criminal syndicate, and the syndicate is applying its own, often lethally violent, pressure. The state has to make the immediate legal consequence of staying silent outweigh the potential criminal consequence of speaking up. They have to squeeze harder than the cartel.
Which perfectly transitions us to the final piece of the puzzle. We've talked extensively about how the state manages and coerces the witness, but the state isn't just threatening the witness to make them talk. How does the law strike back at the criminal syndicates who are actively trying to terrorize and silence these individuals?
The countermeasures.
Exactly. How do they protect the perimeter of the program? We are moving into the final provisions of the law, looking at how the system shields itself.
Section 17 creates a highly specific crime, penalty for harassment of a witness. It states that any person who harasses a witness and thereby hinders, delays, prevents, or dissuades them from attending court, reporting a crime, seeking an arrest, or causing a prosecution will be penalized.
This is pretty broad language.
The language here is intentionally broad. You don't actually have to physically assault the witness, just the act of harassment, a threatening phone call, following their spouse, sending a cryptic message. If it delays their participation, it is a criminal offense.
But let's look at the punishment for that harassment. The law says the harasser shall be fined not more than 3,000 pesos or suffer imprisonment of not less than 6 months, but not more than 1 year, or both. Okay, I have to stop and question the scale of these penalties.
I had a feeling you would.
The program, according to Section 20, is initially funded with a massive 10 million peso appropriation from the National Treasury. But if a cartel enforcer actively terrorizes a star witness, derails a massive multi-million-dollar corruption trial, and completely compromises a state asset, the maximum fine the state can hit them with is 3,000 pesos.
Right.
That is absolute pocket change for a criminal syndicate. They would pay that out of petty cash. Does this harassment law actually have any real teeth against wealthy, organized criminals?
If you focus solely on the monetary fine, you are entirely correct. It appears incredibly weak, even adjusting for the inflation of the peso since 1991. However, the real threat of Section 17 isn't the financial penalty.
It's the jail time.
It is the mandatory minimum prison time. The law says imprisonment of not less than 6 months. For an associate of a syndicate who is used to operating in the shadows with total impunity, guaranteeing a half-year jail sentence just for making a threatening phone call or lingering outside a courthouse is a serious operational deterrent.
Takes them off the street.
It takes a soldier off the board. But the true teeth of this section, the genuinely destructive mechanism, is found in the final clause, which targets the most dangerous harassers of all: corrupt public officials.
Right. The law states that if the harasser is a public officer, they shall also suffer the penalty of perpetual disqualification from holding public office.
Exactly. Think about what that mechanically means for a corrupt politician. It is like permanently unplugging the machine they use to protect themselves.
They lose everything.
If a mayor or a police chief uses their power to try and intimidate a witness, they don't just face a minor fine and a few months in jail. They lose their power forever. They can never run for office again. They can never hold government employment again. The state severs their access to the machinery of power entirely. A corrupt politician without an office is just a criminal without a shield. It is the ultimate deterrent.
That makes a lot of sense. You hit them where it actually hurts, their authority and their access. Now, you mentioned the initial funding of 10 million pesos to get the program off the ground. But there is a second paragraph regarding funding that I found absolutely fascinating because it deals with how the state can recoup these massive expenses.
Yes, the cost recovery mechanism. This is a brilliant piece of legislative engineering. The law states that expenses incurred in the implementation of the program may be recovered as part of the cost or indemnity imposed upon the accused if they are convicted.
Walk me through how that works in a courtroom. It sounds like a profound, almost poetic form of financial justice.
Let's use your logistics firm scenario. The CEO and the mayor are found guilty of laundering money for the cartel entirely because your accountant testified. The state had to spend millions of pesos relocating the accountant, paying their salary for a year, moving their kids, and providing 247 armed security.
A huge bill.
At sentencing, the judge doesn't just hand down a prison term. The judge pulls out the ledger of the witness protection program, looks at the convicted CEO and mayor, and orders them to personally reimburse the state for every single peso spent hiding the witness from them.
That is incredible. The convicted criminal ultimately has to foot the bill for the government program that kept their accuser safe.
It creates a closed loop of accountability. Not only does the criminal lose their freedom and their office, but they are forced to liquidate their own assets to finance the very instrument of their own downfall.
Wow.
It is a highly satisfying legal concept. Now, in practice, extracting that wealth from deeply entrenched syndicates who hide money in shell companies can be its own complex, years-long legal battle. But the statutory right for the state to collect that debt is ironclad.
So let's pull all of these threads together. We have spent this time tracing an incredible, necessary evolution of state protection and the raw mechanics of securing testimony.
It's been quite a journey.
We started back in 1975 with President Marcos and a highly targeted, almost desperate decree that simply offered bribe givers a basic get-out-of-jail-free card in exchange for taking down corrupt officials. And we've seen how, over 16 years, the reality of violent intimidation forced the state to abandon that simple fix and build the massive, highly regimented machinery of the 1991 Witness Protection, Security, and Benefit Act.
We have watched the law evolve from a simple promise of legal immunity to a vast whole-of-government program that can literally erase your identity, secretly pay your salary at a private company, guarantee a generational college education for your children, and forcibly void your constitutional right against self-incrimination, compelling you to speak under the threat of being locked in a cell contiguous to the courtroom.
Why should you, the listener, care about all of this? Why spend an hour deep diving into the intricate clauses and mechanisms of witness protection? Because it forces a stark realization about the justice system you rely on every single day to keep your society safe. We like to think of justice as an inevitable force like gravity. We assume the bad guys will eventually get caught because the system works. But these documents prove that justice is deeply inherently fragile. It is entirely dependent on human courage.
The entire system, with all its judges and police and prisons, grinds to an absolute halt if people are too terrified to speak. These laws pull back the curtain on how heavily stacked the deck naturally is against the truth. They reveal the extreme lengths, the profound ethical compromises, and the massive financial expenses society must undergo just to tip the scales back toward justice.
It shows that the state isn't just a punisher. In the pursuit of truth, the state has to become a negotiator, an insurer, a protector, and sometimes a ruthless extortionist. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Something for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. Think back to the state witness. The legal requirement that the person admitted into the program must not appear to be most guilty.
The necessary forgiveness of the lieutenant to catch the kingpin.
Exactly. By definition, this law means our justice system systematically and intentionally allows moderately guilty people, individuals who are active, willing accomplices to grave felonies like murder, kidnapping, or massive public theft, to walk completely free. And not just walk free. They might be living next door to you right now. They might be operating under a brand new identity with their housing, their livelihood, and their children's education entirely funded by your tax dollars. So the question you have to ask yourself as a citizen is this. Are you comfortable with the fact that achieving ultimate justice for the worst offenders in our society requires granting complete state-funded grace to their accomplices?
It is the heavy cost of doing business in a complex world.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
Welcome to the debate. Imagine just for a second that you are an administrative aide for a powerful government official. And you've just watched your boss accept a briefcase packed with 1 million pesos in cash from a defense contractor.
Wow. Just sitting right there in the room?
Right. You are the only witness. So if you speak up, the state's anti-bribery laws dictate that you could go to jail as an accomplice, simply for being in the room and handling the paperwork. But if you talk, you also face an entirely different threat. The contractor syndicate might just have you killed.
It's basically a lose-lose situation for you.
Exactly. It's an impossible choice. So today, we are debating how the state actually gets you to open your mouth. We are grounding this discourse in 2 profoundly different Filipino legal texts that try to solve this exact problem. I will be advocating for the surgical, outcome-driven efficiency of pure transactional immunity found in the 1975 Presidential Decree No. 749.
Right? And I'll be defending the holistic, conditional, and structurally secure framework of comprehensive witness protection, which was established by the 1991 Republic Act No. 6981. These 2 texts, they really represent a massive philosophical collision regarding what justice actually requires in the real world.
They absolutely do.
I mean, they ask entirely different questions about human nature, about fear, and what a person actually needs to feel safe enough to tell the truth against a powerful institution.
Yeah, so let's look closely at the mechanics of that 1975 decree, because frankly, I view it as an absolute masterclass in legal pragmatism. The preamble of the text itself perfectly diagnoses the disease of systemic graft. It outright states that it has been, quote, virtually impossible to secure convictions of dishonest public servants.
Because everyone's terrified.
Right, exactly. Because the bribe-givers and the accomplices are paralyzed by the fear of being indicted themselves. It's basically a system of mutually assured destruction. So the decree zeroes in on a very specific outrage, the corrupt official who is, in the incredibly vivid words of the text, insolently remaining in public office while continuing their nefarious practices.
The imagery there is striking. Insolently remaining. But, diagnosing the disease is very different from prescribing a survivable cure.
Well, but the cure it offers is brilliantly precise because it leverages the law itself as the weapon. It grants automatic transactional immunity from prosecution to the bribe giver. Why? Specifically to target the corrupt official. It restores the foundational principle that public office is a public trust.
By just letting the bribe giver walk free?
By stripping away the threat of prosecution for the accomplice. Yes, it completely removes the legal friction stopping the testimony. And it does this with a streamlined shield. There are no massive bureaucratic applications here. There are only 5 clear conditions to meet.
Only 5.
Just 5, the violation must be consummated, the testimony must be necessary and corroboratable. The state doesn't already have the information, and the witness hasn't been convicted of a crime involving a history of serious deception or fraud. That's it. When time is of the essence, a streamlined automatic legal shield is infinitely superior to a bloated bureaucratic process.
Well, I come at it from a different way. While the 1975 decree is, sure, it's undeniably pragmatic in its speed, the 1991 Comprehensive Protection Framework represents the superior and necessary evolution of jurisprudence.
How so?
Because immunity without physical security is a hollow promise. What good is a legal decree saying the state won't put you in a jail cell if you do not survive long enough to make it to the witness stand?
Well, the
1991 law correctly identifies that the primary barrier to testimony isn't merely legal liability from the state. It's the existential threat from the syndicate. It explicitly addresses threats to life or bodily injury, not just to the witness, but to their immediate family and their in-laws.
Broadening the scope to include extended family networks sounds ideal on paper, but in practice, doesn't that immediately bog the state down in logistical nightmares rather than, aggressive prosecution?
The state has to handle those logistics if it actually wants the truth to see the light of day. The holistic benefits provided in the 1991 law, like secure housing facilities, livelihood assistance, medical treatment, and sometimes a complete change of personal identity. These aren't bureaucratic bloat. They are the absolute prerequisites for physical survival.
But at what cost to the justice system itself?
Well, let me finish this thought because it's crucial. The rigorous guardrails for admitting a state witness, specifically the requirement for the Department of Justice to prove the witness does not appear to be the most guilty party in the conspiracy, prevent the state from being manipulated. Without those structural and moral guardrails, you aren't administering justice. You're just handing sophisticated, wealthy criminals a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Okay, I want to dig into that specific mechanism of breaking the silence because this is where our philosophies really diverge on how you actually dismantle a criminal network. I view the 1975 decree as a legal Gordian knot cutter. In corrupt networks, like we noted, the accomplices are bound together by the threat of shared prison time.
Right, the mutually assured destruction.
Yes, if I talk, we both go down. The 1975 decree severs that bond instantly. By explicitly removing the threat of the state's strict anti-bribery laws for the bribe giver, the state instantly flips the accomplice into an asset. Think of it like a highly targeted, localized antibiotic.
An antibiotic?
Exactly. It isolates the exact cause of the silence, which is the fear of prosecution, and eliminates it upon contact. You don't need to build a whole new life for the witness. You just need to remove the legal peril they face from the state itself.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Your analogy of the localized antibiotic assumes that the only disease threatening the witness is the state's own penal code. But the terminal disease in organized crime is the retaliatory violence of the syndicate. Legal exoneration cannot stop physical retaliation. A piece of paper granting immunity from anti-bribery laws does not deflect bullets when you walk out of the courthouse.
Well, no one is saying a piece of paper deflects bullets, but
under the 1991 law, the state explicitly provides for an actual physical fortress. If a witness is testifying against a powerful public official who controls the local police force or private armed groups, they need a secure housing facility. They need relocation. They need their children pulled out of their current schools and protected. They do not just need a waiver of prosecution.
Right. Well, if we are talking about the reality of that physical fortress, we really have to look closely at the text of the 1991 law itself. There is a rather grim detail hidden in the provisions outlining these supposedly comprehensive benefits.
Grim? What do you mean?
The law actually stipulates the provision of a burial benefit of not less than 10,000 pesos if a witness is killed because of their participation in the program. To me, that is an astonishing, implicit admission by the legislature that these comprehensive, heavily regulated protection programs frequently fail to keep witnesses alive.
Oh, I wouldn't call it an admission of failure.
I mean, a burial benefit? The bureaucracy of finding a safe house and changing an identity simply cannot outpace a hired assassin.
Knowledge in a worst-case scenario isn't an admission of structural failure. It is realistic, comprehensive planning.
The state is dealing with violent cartels and entrenched political dynasties. Of course, there is a risk of death, which is exactly why the socioeconomic safety net extends to the family if the worst happens.
But it highlights the extreme vulnerability of the waiting game. The philosophy behind the 1975 decree is that the fastest, most effective way to neutralize the physical threat to the witness is to successfully and swiftly prosecute the official giving the orders. You neutralize the threat by legally decapitating the corrupt leadership.
In theory.
In practice, if you rely on a slow, sprawling welfare program where a witness sits in a safe house for years waiting for trial, you leave the official in power longer, dramatically increasing the window of danger.
Swift prosecution is a noble goal, certainly, but it cannot come at the expense of systemic integrity. And that brings us to the vulnerability of the state to manipulation, which the older decree handles very poorly. Under the 1975 framework, practically any accomplice can claim immunity simply by pointing the finger at a public official.
They have to meet the 5 conditions.
Sure, but it still creates a deeply perverse incentive structure. The most cunning criminal masterminds, the billionaires funding the corruption, can insulate themselves from prison by simply offering up a mid-level politician to the prosecutors. The 1991 law offers a much more sophisticated moral framework.
How so?
To be admitted as a state witness, there must be absolute necessity. There must be no other direct evidence available. And crucially, the Department of Justice must ensure the witness does not appear to be the most guilty.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on that most guilty clause. Because I look at that requirement not as a moral triumph, but as a bureaucratic trap that inherently delays justice and destroys evidence.
A trap? How is evaluating guilt a trap?
Because when you are dealing with systemic graft, let's say a massive infrastructure kickback scheme, determining who is most guilty is philosophically and legally murky. Is it the billionaire contractor who initiated the bribe, or is it the department secretary who accepted it and betrayed the entire country?
Well, they both are highly culpable.
But exactly. But if the Department of Justice has to spend months parsing the hierarchy of guilt in boardroom meetings before granting protection, the evidence disappears. The money is wired offshore, and the documents are shredded. The 1975 decree rightly identifies that the public official is always the primary target. Why? Because they hold the public trust. The bribe giver, no matter how wealthy or sinister, is legally and morally secondary to the corruption of the office itself.
But you cannot simply wave away the culpability of the mastermind. If the state doesn't evaluate the hierarchy of guilt, it becomes a pawn for syndicates to settle scores. Furthermore, let me offer a counterexample straight from the mechanics of the justice system.
Go ahead.
What happens if the witness gets their automatic immunity under your preferred 1975 decree? The public official's reputation is dragged through the mud in the press, and then the witness simply refuses to testify in court, or worse, deliberately changes their tune on the stand to sabotage the prosecution.
The 1975 decree does address this contingency, actually. It clearly states that immunity shall not attach if it turns out the information is false, malicious, or made solely to harass the official.
But the phrase "shall not attach" is entirely passive. It leaves the state scrambling after the fact to undo the damage, trying to piece together a prosecution against a witness who has already derailed the trial. The 1991 law handles this elegantly and proactively.
Through the Memorandum of Agreement?
Exactly. Before any protection or immunity is ever given, the law requires a formalized Memorandum of Agreement setting forth highly specific responsibilities. If the witness breaches that agreement, there is a clear mechanism for termination. More importantly, the law explicitly holds the witness liable for contempt or perjury if they refuse to testify or testify falsely. The 1991 framework treats the witness not as a passive recipient of your localized antibiotic, but as an active participant bound by a strict behavioral contract. If they break that contract, the state has immediate, explicitly defined teeth to punish them.
Look, I hear you, but I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning. Because what you refer to as a necessary behavioral contract, I see as catastrophic procedural friction. And procedural friction is the absolute enemy of the spontaneous whistleblower. Let's go back to the administrative aid we discussed at the very beginning.
Okay, the terrified aide.
Right. Under the 1991 law,
that terrified aide cannot just come forward and be immediately shielded from prosecution. First, they must execute a sworn statement detailing their own participation in the crime, practically handing the state a confession before they are even guaranteed protection. Then, they must sign a memorandum of agreement detailing a laundry list of responsibilities. The Department of Justice then has to conduct an investigation to evaluate if there really is no other direct evidence.
Those are necessary steps to ensure the state isn't being lied to.
But look at the practical implications. The 1991 law even brings the witness's employer into the mix.
Right.
It mandates notifying the employer within 30 days to ensure the witness isn't demoted for missing work due to trial obligations. What if that aide's immediate supervisor is golf buddies with the corrupt official they are trying to expose? By notifying the employer, the state's quote-unquote protection program has just painted a target on the whistleblower's back. Every single one of those procedural steps, the sworn statements, the evaluations, the employer notifications, is a moment where the witness might get cold feet or where a leak in the bureaucracy could literally get them killed.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that this procedural friction is actually the very socioeconomic scaffolding required to sustain a human being through a multi-year trial? You point out the employer notification as a flaw, but look at what that provision actually achieves.
Which is what?
The law guarantees that any witness who fails to report for work because of witness duty shall be paid their equivalent salaries. That applies to both government and private employees. Imagine being a middle-class worker. You cannot afford to miss 3 weeks of work to sit in a courthouse waiting to testify. The 1991 law ensures your family doesn't starve while you serve the state. Furthermore, it guarantees free education from primary to college level for your dependent children in case you are permanently incapacitated or killed.
The intent behind that is deeply ambitious, I agree, but it ignores the financial realities of the state.
Violent syndicates or deeply entrenched political dynasties. By providing this rigorous vetting and this comprehensive socioeconomic protection, the state ensures that only highly committed, rigorously vetted witnesses enter the system. This leads to stronger, more reliable, bulletproof convictions. And as for your concern about the slow pace of the bureaucracy leaving them in danger, the 1991 law explicitly mandates that the judicial body shall ensure a speedy trial and endeavor to finish the proceedings within 3 months.
3 months?
Yes, the law anticipates the need for speed, but couples it with necessary thoroughness.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it very differently. Endeavoring to finish a trial in 3 months in the real-world justice system is frankly often more of a polite suggestion than a reality. When you are prosecuting wealthy, corrupt officials, their defense lawyers will file endless motions to delay, to suppress evidence, to question jurisdiction. A 3-month endeavor routinely turns into a 3-year grinding war of attrition.
Well, trials are complex.
They are. And the reality is, the longer the state is responsible for paying a witness's salary, housing them in a secure facility, and paying for their medical treatment, the more strained the system becomes.
The justice system is supposed to bear that strain. That is its function.
But it cannot bear it financially. When the 1991 law was passed, it authorized an initial appropriation of just 10 million pesos to fund the entire witness protection program. In the context of nationwide organized crime syndicates and systemic government corruption across thousands of islands, 10 million pesos is a drop in the ocean.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is a false promise of a fortress. This is exactly why I maintain that the approach of the 1975 decree is fundamentally more sustainable and grounded in reality. It doesn't cost the state millions in housing stipends and college tuitions to grant transactional immunity. It weaponizes the accomplices against the corrupt officials using the leverage of the law itself, rather than relying on the state's highly limited treasury.
Relying purely on transactional immunity because it is cheaper is a false economy. It might not cost the Treasury directly in housing stipends, sure, but it costs the justice system its fundamental credibility. Imagine the societal damage when citizens see admitted criminals, people who facilitated millions in bribes, walking free without any ongoing supervision, without any behavioral contracts, simply because they testified against the mayor or a customs official.
I think citizens would just be happy the corrupt official is gone.
Not if the mastermind is untouched. The investment that the 1991 Comprehensive Law demands is an investment in the legitimacy of the entire democratic process. If the public believes the state is just trading favors with criminals to win cases, the authority of the justice system collapses.
Well, as we untangle the depths of these two texts, I remain firmly convinced that the 1975 decree represents a pure, unfiltered mechanism to root out the specific cancer of public corruption. When the state's very institutions are compromised by dishonest public servants, the fastest and most precise cure is to legally weaponize the accomplices against those officials.
Right.
By instantly removing the fear of prosecution for the bribe giver and dispensing with exhaustive bureaucratic evaluations and underfunded socioeconomic welfare programs, the state can surgically extract the corrupt individuals who insolently violate the public trust. The speed of the extraction is the ultimate protection.
And I maintain that true justice requires the robust structural realism found in the 1991 Comprehensive Framework. It understands profoundly that a witness is not just a disposable tool for the prosecution. They are a human being who requires physical protection from retaliation, economic stability for their dependents, and strict behavioral accountability to ensure they don't abuse the system.
It's an immense undertaking.
It is, but you simply cannot dismantle entrenched violent corruption on the cheap. And you certainly cannot do it by handing out blanket legal passes without rigorous moral vetting. The comprehensive approach ensures that the state is actually protecting the vulnerable while aggressively pursuing the most guilty actors in a conspiracy.
Despite our distinct positions, it is clear that we share a fundamental premise derived from the reality of both of these texts. The state absolutely cannot function, and it cannot cleanse itself of systemic corruption without the raw courage of human witnesses. Standard law enforcement tools, routine subpoenas, and standard paper trail investigations are entirely insufficient when dealing with the insulated, mutually assured destruction of bribery and organized crime.
We are in complete agreement on that reality. The wall of silence is very real, and it is arguably the greatest adversary of justice. Where we remain in thoughtful, entrenched disagreement is on how the state should prioritize its limited resources and legal authority when attempting to breach that wall. Do we prioritize the sheer speed, efficiency, and disruptive power of targeted legal immunity?
Right.
Or do we prioritize the comprehensive physical safety, the socioeconomic stability, and the rigorous moral vetting of the human being providing the testimony?
It highlights the incredibly complex tightrope the justice system is forced to walk between aggressively prosecuting the guilty and adequately protecting the vulnerable. Studying the evolution from a 1975 decree focused entirely on swift legal leverage to a 1991 statute focused on holistic socioeconomic protection offers profound insights into the mechanics of institutional integrity. It forces us to ask what price the state is willing to pay to hear the truth.
It absolutely does. It shows a legal system learning, adapting, and openly struggling with the very real, very dangerous human costs of taking on organized power.
We leave it to you, the listener, to ponder which approach truly serves the greater public interest. Put yourself back in the shoes of that terrified administrative aide holding the secret that could bring down a corrupt empire. Are you better served by the surgical strike of automatic immunity that demands nothing but the truth? Or the fortified bureaucratic bunker that demands total accountability but promises your family's survival?
It is a question without an easy answer.
Thank you for joining us for this rigorous exchange of ideas. We look forward to exploring another perspective with you next time.